Hey everybody, Pete A. Turner, executive producer and host of your Break It Down show. I truly mean it. It is your show as well as it is mine. I'm out there always trying to find things for us to talk about, and we cover a lot of topics. And it just struck me that we went from Joe Mazer recently talking about sports and COVID to Greg Proops, and that's all kind of fun and everything. And then we got real heavy and had London Crowdy on the show. She talked about her incarceration. And then we had, in the previous episode, was Phil Green talking about his battle with ALS. And now we have an exceptionally challenging episode, Sarah Braasch. And she's one of the people that has been called a Karen and got in trouble for calling the cops for napping while black. But the reality is when you get into this story, it doesn't add up. There's problems with it. And so we have our expert on hate crime hoaxes, Dr. Will Reilly from Kentucky State University. And we get into what this story is. Now, look, Sarah has her own issues with damage from before and how she handles situations. And one of the things I want to say about this before you dive in, because I think it's important, there's a series of events that happens to Sarah that make this whole story not stand up when you start to examine it. One of the things is she's been abused. And so she's put into a dorm where it's secured access, and she's the only person on her floor. No one else can even live up there, in part because she does not want human contact. She doesn't want to share a elevator with you or anything else. She's a damaged person in that regard. And so when all of a sudden there's all this interaction, she doesn't handle it 100% well because she's got this issue. But it's not racism. It seems to be a problem of two systems kind of disagreeing with each other. I don't want to spoil the story, but I think as you hear it, if you listen with an open mind, you'll hear the problems of, any problem she may have. The school did not handle the situation well, and it got way out of hand. It became a national story. This is something that could have been handled in a dorm fairly simply by sitting across from a table and people leaving each other alone for the most part. But that's not what happens. So get ready for another challenging episode, back to back to back. London Phil and now Sarah Braasch. I'm just going to really quickly point out that Scott and I right now are probably planning some aspect of our trip, if not already on the road. You never know. We'll see what happens. Life brings all kinds of crazy things up, but we would love to have you support our cross-country trip. That is, we're going to South Carolina, and Scott's going to put his friend Dan White in the ground. He's going to give his eulogy. He's a veteran, and he killed himself. So what we want to do is continue to maintain the awareness for veteran suicide and ask you all for your help. Any amount of money will help us to help veterans who are trying not to kill themselves. As someone who has suicidal ideation every day, I will tell you, it would be nice to have that load off of my back. And now look, I'm fine. I have the tools to deal with it. I have a great network of friends, so I don't want you to worry specifically about me. I'm honest about this because that next veteran that hears my honesty will hopefully say, hey, I can get help too. So I will tell you all, if you're in this place, whether you're a veteran or not, and you feel like you're running out of time and options, if you have the ability to reach out, you can hit me up, Pete@breakitdownshow.com. I'll do my absolute best to help you out. Reach out to a helpline, get help, interact with people. It may not feel like you're able to. Do it. It could literally save your life. And if you aren't in that position, but you're worried about someone else, or just in general, reach out to the people that you love. Try to interact with them as much as possible. Yeah, great. It's tough right now with COVID. All the more reason to dig in. Pick up that phone, make a call, send that text when you think about that person and say, hey, I was just thinking about you. Nothing to do. Just want to let you know I love you. I was thinking about you and hope you're well. I hope you all can understand that lesson. So if you can't support us, Save the Brave, savethebrave.org. Put a little bit of money in the pot. I promise you, we don't take profit out of this. We absolutely put this money to work trying to save lives. If that's valuable to you, well, then there you go. Help us do that. All right. Sarah Braasch, here she comes. Get ready. It's a crazy one.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland. This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Sarah Braasch, and you are watching The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yes, indeed. We've got Sarah Braasch on the show. I guess you're notable because there was a whole gosh, I hate to say the word kerfluffle, but it kind of describes it. There was a whole bunch of folks talking about things, and you wound up becoming a horrible racist in the process. And so I thought what we might do is, one, reference, I'm going to put a link up here to the Happy Warrior podcast, another fellow named Pete. And you guys did this on Thursday, and it provides a lot of the background in the story.
Yes.
And if you type in Sarah, this is for the audience, if you type in Sarah Braasch, you will certainly find her name and a lot of conversation about napping while black, and then what they claim that Sarah did. And the point of this episode is to get into, and we're going to have Will Reilly join us here in a moment, as he's on another call. So the point of this is not to pick sides and say who's right or who's wrong. It's just to do some due diligence on it. It's easy to take a situation where something happens and we look at video and we all say, this is what happened. And we all decide that that's the thing. But quite often there's a lot more context required to be intelligent about a conversation in terms of what happened. And so before we label someone a racist and try to throw them away, we need to do some work. And I think that's what we owe you, Sarah, is a chance to do some work.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You're
Yes.
welcome. Talk a little bit, just for the audience, to give them a sense for, okay, so you're accused of, what was the word, practically lynching? What was the...
Right. Well, I was actually accused by, just in a quick nutshell, what people think happened on May 8th, 2018 over like a couple early morning hours is exactly the opposite of what actually happened. So the false narrative, of course, that most people know, especially if you're watching this, you probably already know, was that I was trolling the main ground floor common room of my Yale dorm at approximately 2 a.m. for random sleeping Black people to call 911 on because I'm supposedly a racist.
Yes.
So that is basically, in a nutshell, what the false narrative was that was propagated around the world, and then the moral outrage mob that ensued, and the global vilification campaign that ensued basically completely destroyed my life. So what the truth is...
Well, let's get into the truth in a second.
Yeah.
I want to spend some time. By the way, I've put a link up, to be fair, for people to read what the other side looks like so we can all kind of compare and contrast. Because what we're going to get into is that there's a whole lot more to this story. First off, maybe not your life's work, but a predominance of your life's work has involved with helping Black folks, whether they're in Africa or in other countries under duress. You've helped these people out. You were anything but a racist. That's just not the case at all. Here comes Dr. Will, and I want to get his thoughts.
What up?
There he is. What up?
Hey,
Hi.
Dr. Reilly, we were just kind of setting the stage, and I wanted to have you quickly, because you're the published expert on this, and I'm going to put your link to your book up here.
Yeah.
You have dealt with hate crime hoaxes and determining what these things are. So a couple of key words for me when these things happen is when it seems impossibly brutal, Tawana Brawley, Jussie Smollett, you're like, does that really happen? So like the lynching thing seems to be a trigger word where I'm like, well, I got to pay attention. This may not be what it is. But would you classify Sarah's thing as a race crime hoax?
I think right on the verge. I think that this is an example of what you saw. So a hate crime hoax, to some extent, in the classic form, would be a situation where something that is alleged to have occurred and to have been motivated by racial animus turned out not to have occurred, to have been made up by the alleged victim, to have never happened to some extent. I mean, there was an incident on one collegiate campus where a bag of dog crap was found on the stoop of a Black residential building, and there were demonstrations, protests. This became a national news story, and it turned out that a blind woman had placed it there because the campus had instructed her that if she was walking her service dog and it did what dogs do, she should place that in kind of any friendly building and people would take care of it for her. So nothing happened there at all. I mean, this was someone actually being responsible, and the incident kind of vanished. So that's what generally in hate crime hoax, I describe as a hoax incident. I mean, the most typical hoax would be someone claiming that they were attacked when they weren't. And I actually have a 4-part structure. I mean, but that would also extend so far as to include incidents that were promoted by the media or by a supposedly affected individual that didn't occur at all. I think in the Sarah case, you're right on that line, because something did happen in that, someone was asked to, get up in a university common room, which we're going to discuss. But there wasn't any racial motivation as far as I've been able to tell. I would say that this, I'm kind of rambling here, this strikes me as more wild exaggeration by the media of a very minor incident than anything else.
If there was no video, this wouldn't even be a thing, I don't think.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
That's right.
Okay, let me continue to kind of set the stage here. One of the things you talk quite a bit about, especially in the Happy Warrior podcast, which everybody should go check out. I'll put the link up here now. And if you guys can't find that, I'll put it in the show notes. Feel free to ask me for it. But in the Happy Warrior thing, you talked about hypervigilance a number of times. I'm a veteran, and I've got hypervigilance, and I got that because of my PTSD. So let's talk about that. Why are you hypervigilant? And I never blame. Look, I've learned to do this. I've been a caveman for a long time, but I never blame a woman for feeling unsafe. Like if I'm walking behind a woman, I'll say, "Hey, I'm here. I don't mean you any harm. I'm glad to walk right by you." Whatever. Because I didn't realize how often women felt unsafe. And again, I've been a big dummy for a long time, but every campus has a phone that they like. You can call. You can always call. Please call. We want you to call, even if it's nothing. No harm, no foul. Call. Or UCLA has it. They'll respond in less than a minute.
Right.
And these are not 911 numbers. These are just like, we will walk you home. We'll do this, because they're always trying to create that net of safety. Why are you so hypervigilant?
Well, just in a nutshell, because I have unfortunately just lived a life of really egregious trauma and violence, including sexual trauma and violence. I grew up in an incredibly abusive home. As I mentioned on the Happy Warrior podcast, I grew up in a very misogynistic cult of the Jehovah's Witnesses. I definitely consider them to be a cult. But as I had mentioned in the other podcasts, they are actually a significantly racially integrated religious community. And so I grew up even in the 70s and 80s in the suburbs of the Twin Cities in Minnesota in a at least somewhat racially integrated religious community. And they also teach that racism is an absolute, sin against God. So the whole notion that I would ever be suspicious of someone because of the color of their skin or uncomfortable around them just would absolutely never happen. It's notion. But I did grow up as a cult, and I also consider them to be a safe haven for pedophiles and abusers. So I did myself grow up in a very abusive family. And then I did have a couple other instances of sexual assault that I endured. And to be perfectly honest, and I've been very public about this, which surprises some people, but I also just want to really destigmatize being a sexual assault survivor and having experienced trauma and enduring PTSD. And I really want to destigmatize that. And so I actually, to be perfectly honest, I experienced a sexual assault at the hands of a doctor in Rabat, Morocco, when I was spending a summer there. That would have been the summer of 2007. I was working with a human rights organization as a legal intern. And since that time, so that's 13 years now, I have not had I haven't let anyone touch me. Like, I have had no sexual or romantic relationships with anyone since that time. I think that was just like the nail in the coffin for me. I was just like, I'm done. I'm out. I'm taking my ball and going home.
Yeah. Let me go over to Dr.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Let me ask Dr. Reilly this. Okay, so I know what my life is like with PTSD. I have constant suicidal ideation, and I'm fine. I've got measures to deal with it. I've got counseling. Yeah. But my hypervigilance for a long time was just like super spiky. I would turn and look at things that were not there all the time. So we've got that, that kind of a reaction for Sarah on her end. But also the lady that was the napper, she says some things in the video that are curious to me. And I wanted to get your thoughts on this. She talks about her ancestors building the building. And these things seem like, well, it seems like there's some damage on her end too. Like, we don't know what her psyche is. She's not on the show, but what are your thoughts on her level of, what does she bring to this party?
Well, I think that this is kind of interesting because coming from that political science perspective or thinking of, some of these criminal justice classes, any interaction between people involves two or more human individuals. So you're not dealing with sort of representatives of their races. You're dealing with individual people who have the traumas and the life experiences that they've gone through just existing. And that's what they're, as you said, bringing to the table. The podcaster Adam Carolla has a whole thing where he talks about if you are African American and you are pulled over by a cop and the cop is being rude and brusque and a little bit harassing, you're going to say that cop is a racist, that cop is a bigot. Whereas if you are a white guy and you're pulled over by the exact same cop, my fiance, who's a redhead, was pulled over yesterday by a local officer who asked her questions for about 15 minutes. Your reaction is going to be, this guy had a bad day, or maybe even not necessarily in that case, but this guy's an asshole. Mm-hmm. So I think that it's entirely likely that the person on the other side of this case might have experienced some genuine racism during 4 years at Yale. Everyone has some negative experiences in life, or perhaps went through some trauma back home. As I understand, she was from Nigeria. There might have been a lot of things that led to the assumption that this was motivated by bigotry or that there was some chain of events leading up to the harassment of her. But the question is, if you're looking at this from a criminal justice perspective, was that real? So this entire incident seems to have been based around kind of personal misunderstanding and dislike between a couple of individuals. And yeah, I'm sure psychological issues played a role in that. You can't speak for what each person was dealing with at a given time. But my big question with this isn't how the individuals involved with it handled the incident. It's to some extent why Yale chose to do some of the things that they did. Why was the automatic reaction of this major university, not these students don't like each other, or maybe we should lock the room when it's not in use or something like that. But the automatic reaction was, this is an incident of racial harassment. We're going to take this extraordinarily seriously. We're going to consider expulsion. I assume someone may have leaked the information that got into the New York Times. I'm not accusing any specific individual, but why? Why was that? That's what interested me about this. Why was that the response? What's going on in higher education that was kind of the default that happened in terms of what we're talking about here, which was basically the cops waking up someone taking a nap and asking why they were there.
Yeah.
Why did this become a national story? And of course, a past mild trauma might have played a role in the person taking a nap being angry. We don't know, but that's quite likely. The bigger issue for me is why that became a big deal in the first place.
Yeah, it seems like a huge waste of resources to get this far down the road on this. Okay, you guys both, we're here, we're the cops. Everything seems to be fine. Can we just go on about our business here? It's interesting. Sarah, I want to bring up some of the background too. And again, everybody should go watch the Happy Warrior podcast. There's a lot of the backgrounds in there. You were on the 12th floor of a dorm that has a specific security system to it. So the rest of the campus can't get in unless they've got a key card. And you're up in the top floor in part to accommodate your predilection towards like, hey, I don't feel safe ever. I don't want anybody touching me. I don't want a relationship. I want to be left alone. And so they put you in what you called an isolated area.
That's right.
Okay. So, and then on that floor, there was
absolutely.
Only...
And go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to explain, I think, what you were about to explain. Not at all. So, yes, my room was the only room on that floor, the only dorm room on that floor. And the only other room on that floor was a smallish room that was called the 12th floor common room. But as I always try to be really specific about the physicality of the space, because I think it's such an important issue, is that truly was a misnomer, truly is a misnomer, that room was rarely used. It was used about once a week for a party, and I had never complained to Yale Housing about those parties, even though they had been, sometimes annoying. And I think to the best of my memory, I maybe had twice called the Yale campus police, the non-emergency helpline, of course, not to get anyone in trouble, but just to say, hey, could you come by and do one of those, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here for me, just have them wrap things up for me, because it's, in quiet hours and it's been going on for however long and they're being pretty raucous. And that was normal and reasonable and accept for me to call the non-emergency helpline of the Yale campus police, which truly is just more or less campus security. Yes, I acknowledge that they are technically police officers and they do carry weapons.
Was this dorm primarily postgraduates?
This dorm was primarily graduate students. Yes, this was.
So you also have people doing serious academic work. You have a job teaching people. You're working on a dissertation. You've got people working on master's degrees. This is a place for study. Okay. And then you had the incident with the gentleman in the stairwell where you said, hey, why are you here? And that person didn't have access to the building. So you were in your right to say this is a controlled space with your background. You questioned that. And that sort of started this whole scenario off. Can you expand upon what happened after that? And this is a very minor thing. It's just someone that was up there. It didn't belong there.
So minor.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And this is why I do actually consider the living or napping while Black incident there's a couple elements why I do actually consider it to be a hate crime hoax. And the first one is because there was and people don't seem to realize this either, which is a really important thing to tell people, is that this did not take place over a couple early morning hours on May 8th, 2018. This is a conflict that took place over months. So the instigating event was this confrontation between myself and the man, Jean-Louis Renison, on February 24th, 2018, which, as we discussed in the last podcast, was truly such a minor incident. Like it is just completely, it's insane. It's insane how this snowballed into a global scandal. Like it's even now hard for me to wrap my head around what actually happened. Like it just,
and we haven't even
feel
got
like
to
I'm
the
living
part
in
where something happens yet. Like this is just like the precursor.
I know.
So
it's just the precursor.
Right.
It's just the precursor.
And then,
what
happened on February 24th?
What happened essentially is that this young man entered this graduate or postgraduate dormitory that you were living in and attempted to come up to your floor, basically followed you into the elevator and proceeded up to the 12th floor, going to this common room with you. And what happened then? How'd you react?
That's right. So it was pretty clear to me when he followed me into the elevator that he wasn't a resident. But I went up to the 12th floor with him and I told myself, oh, just stay calm. It'll probably be fine. Probably there's some kind of event. It was a Saturday evening. So I thought probably there's some kind of event in that 12th floor common room and he'll just go into the common room and it'll be over. So then he was just standing there. It didn't seem like there was anything going on in the 12th floor common room, and he was just standing there. Now, the entire 12th floor is this very small landing. So he's right next to me. We're shoulder to shoulder, and on the other side is the door for my Yale dorm room. Now, I just was not going to open my Yale dorm room door in front of a complete stranger. Like, as we've discussed before, it wouldn't have mattered if he were white, Black, Asian, Latino, wouldn't have mattered. I probably would have reacted the same way had he been a woman. So what I tried to do is I tried to sort of like walk away, and I was hoping that he would just leave and the situation would resolve itself. So I ended up as I joke, the Yale campus is a little bit like Hogwarts. So I actually walked down to the 11th floor and then back up this weird little side staircase, which exits on the 12th floor into the interior of the 12th floor common room. And so there was was no one in there. There was no event. It was dark. There was nothing happening. And there was no peephole, but I sort of waited at the door, the interior, to sort of be able to tell. I was hoping to be able to tell if he had left or not. And it sounded pretty quiet. So I opened the door and there was no one on the 12th floor landing. And I just thought, oh, great. No harm, no foul. He's left. I can just enter my dorm room door safely. Everything's fine. But then as I was walking across the 12th floor landing, he actually was still there. He was on the landing in between the 11th and 12th floors. And he called out to me and just said something, to the best of my memory, saying, where's the 12th floor common room? So I actually thought for a split second about just ignoring him and just stepping inside my dorm room, because he was far enough away from me that I would have been able to do that before he could get to me if he had any ill intent. But I didn't want to be rude. So I stopped and I pointed to the 12th floor common room that I had just exited. And I told him, I said, well, that's the 12th floor common room, but there's nothing going on in there. There's nobody in there. And I said, you have to be a resident. You have to have a key to gain access. And I said to him, I said, if you're not supposed to be here, I have to ask you to leave. And then he responded to me and he just said, I'm a student. And then I just repeated myself. And I said, it doesn't matter if you're a student. You have to be a resident. You have to have a key. There's no one in there. There's nothing going on. And then what I think actually really upset him was that I did say to him, I said, look, I'm a woman by myself and you're making me very nervous and I have to ask you to please leave now. And so then he sort of scoffed at me and motioned as if he was walking down the stairs. So then I entered my dorm room. Now, I thought for a split second about, should I even bother calling the Yale campus police, which truly is and is seen as and is promoted as being more or less just campus security. And I've been told a million times to call for any reason. They always want to check out a situation, make sure everything's okay. This was totally normal, acceptable thing for me to do. So I called the non-emergency helpline of the Yale campus police. I decided to err on the side of caution. The first thing the officer said to me, or the first thing I said to the officer when they answered the phone, is I said, look, I don't even know if I really need your help. That is literally the first thing I said. And then the officer responded by saying, well, just tell me what happened. And so I told him, and it was basically like a friendly chat with the officer. And then the officer said to me, it was almost like he was saying, as a courtesy, we'll just send someone by. They'll just check out the situation, make sure everything is okay. And he said to me, that officer will come speak to you. And I said, great, no problem. Bye, hung up the phone. So then it did seem like a short time thereafter that there was something that began in that apparent to me that the police officers must have come by at some point, but I do not now believe that they came up to the 12th floor. And the reason being is that I never heard them. And I think I would have heard them because their radios are quite loud and they make a lot of beeps, etc. And so then what happened is that a short time thereafter, over the course of approximately a half hour to 45 minutes, it sounded to me a little bit like they were using the space as a meeting place and then they were going elsewhere. So there was like two or three groups of 2 or 3 students. And as they were leaving, it sounded to me like they were coming by my door and they wanted to make it very clear to me that they were extremely upset with me for having called the Yale campus.
What does that mean,
police.
though? Describe what that means? Because I understand, like, if someone, they probably talked about it, but what did they do?
So what they were doing is they were yelling obscenities and just sort of like mocking and taunting comments. Obviously, like, I felt that it was threatening, but they didn't actually yell threats. And most of it was like, it was mimicry of what I had said to the man, Jean-Louis Renison. So they would say things like, oh, fuck, or oh, hell no, she's going to call the police on us because we're making her nervous, that kind of stuff. So,
Okay.
I mean, obviously,
If I can jump in
did
here.
feel trapped and threatened.
Just to bust in for 1 second, I think it's from this point forward that the story gets kind of crazy for me. Because what happened here? Yeah, what happened here so far seems to me, and I've run this by a couple people, friends in law enforcement and politics, to be sort of a mild interpersonal argument. I mean, a young gentleman who's going to a college party comes into a building. He's alone. Party hasn't started yet. He follows an unaccompanied woman upstairs. She says, basically, hey, bro, what are you doing here? I don't see an event. You're going to have to leave. Now, in that situation, I'd be a little offended. So he sort of says, what do you think I'm a damn thief or something? He scoffs. He leaves. By this point, nothing really has happened on either side. His friends then, and I think this is worse than anything that's happened so far, but his friends then walk by, the room and say, bitch, mocking, being stupid.
Yeah.
At this point, this is dumb, this is silly, but at this point, this is sort of a slap on the wrist from the college disciplinary authorities. To me, the odd part is what happened next.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Sarah, you mentioned you contacted the RAs in the building, and they responded maybe a bit glibly. You think they were friends with some of the people that were at this event. So you contacted what's called the house head or the house manager and just said, hey, this happened. And they basically apologized and said, we should get this handled in a day or two. And to me, that should have been the end of the story, but it wasn't. There were levels beyond this. So what happened next? I mean, we had a quick call about this, and it got up to the level of some of the higher deans at Yale. There were emails sent. You were told you'd have to lead a campus-wide re-education session on racism. Can you take me and Pete through kind of how that process started? Because that's where it gets incredibly bizarre to me.
So I actually believe now that the resident coordinators of the dorm may even have been at the event. And what I believe happened now is that I believe the resident coordinators, along with the two students, Lolade Siyonbola and Reilly, I believe actually that they were concerned about getting in trouble. I believe that they were concerned about getting in trouble for having harassed me. And this is why they didn't send the email response back to my email until hours later, like 4 hours later at 10:30 at night. And I believe that they were taking that time to figure out how they could protect themselves. And I believe now that they thought that the best course of action to protect themselves from getting in trouble for having harassed me over a nothing event, a nothing incident, was to accuse me of having perpetrated a racist hate crime comparable to a lynching. And that is actually what happened. So on Monday, when I met, just like you said, on Monday, when I met with the Yale housing managers, they could not have been nicer to me. They said, Sarah, not only did you do nothing wrong, you're the only person involved who did nothing wrong. We're extremely upset with the way the resident coordinators handled this situation. We are going to reprimand them. And they said, don't give this another thought. Just go back to your dissertation. You don't have to think about this ever again. We're going to handle everything. We're going to deal with the students who were harassing you. You have nothing more to worry about. And I told them, I said, I am perfectly happy with that because I have zero interest in getting anyone in trouble. I have zero interest in ruining anyone's life. That is not an interest of mine in any way, shape, or form. I just wanted to be left alone and in peace. So then at the end of that week, I get an email from the Yale housing managers. They say, now you have to come in and meet with the Yale housing director, George Longyear, on that Friday, which was March 2nd, 2018. I told the Yale housing managers, look, I thought the reason why I had to go in at that point was because the resident coordinators were going to apologize to me for their behavior towards me. That's honestly why I thought I was being asked to come into this meeting. So I said to the Yale housing managers, look, no harm, no foul. I have no interest in getting anyone in trouble. Having to sit there while the resident coordinators apologize to me sounds like an absolute hellish nightmare. I do not want to do that. So I said, please just don't worry about it. Please just tell George Longyear, the Yale housing director, that it's over with and he doesn't need to worry about this anymore. As far as I'm concerned, it's done. And so then, of course, the Yale housing manager said to me, no, you have to come in. So I still think that it's because they want the resident coordinators to apologize to me. So I get to this meeting, and in a nutshell, George Longyear, the Yale housing director, tells me that the man whom I encountered, along with the resident who had invited him, I did not know their names at that point, and I never saw the woman, Lolade Siyonbola, but that they had no the Yale grandee Michelle Nerin. I had actually been accused of perpetrating a racist hate crime comparable to a lynching. That is actually what the letter says. I had no idea at that point. He just told me that I'd been accused of
hate crime
racism.
comparable to a lynching is actually in the letter from Yale. Wow.
Yes, the letter is insane. And I've made it public. They had made it public, Lolade Siyonbola and Jean-Louis Renison at one point.
Okay.
They made it public. Then they must have gotten some blowback, or someone must have told them that that was not a great idea, because then they removed it. But they did make it public, and I have made it public. And that is actually, the letter is off the hook. The letter is crazy. The letter is crazy.
So I
like what they're accusing me of doing compared to what I actually did.
Yeah, just as someone who works in higher education, and I'm going to say this quickly, then get back to your narrative and Pete's questions, but I thought at first you were using a metaphor there when you said racist hate crime comparable to a lynching. If you're saying that's actually the language in the letter, I mean, it is, again, worth comparing that to what actually happened, which is you got into an argument with an unaccompanied young gentleman in your building, and you asked him if he could leave temporarily. That's literally it. That's the whole situation. And there seemed to be a lot of interesting...
That's the whole situation. And he was in violation.
Sure. But I mean, there seems to be a lot of interesting levels here. One of the things that seems to be... Sure. Yeah, but there seem to be a lot of kind of interesting points here. I mean, one of the things you seem to be saying is that the allegation of racism... I mean, the allegation of racism could be being used, frankly, to cover up incompetence. I mean, the argument is that the resident coordinators, or whatever the term there is, wanted to avoid being accused of any involvement with this situation where profanity was yelled at you for a couple of minutes. And so what they said was, well, she's a racist. And that then probably spiraled to a point that they didn't even expect, where you got the letter accusing you of a hate crime, so on. I'm going on a bit here, so I'm going to ask one quick question that would clarify something you mentioned earlier. You pretty much said this, but you would have done the exact same thing if this person in this situation, 20-something male, had been Caucasian, Hispanic, so on. I mean, is that correct?
She's saying
absolutely,
yes.
Absolutely. And even though, yes, absolutely. And even though I recognize that I do have, some hypervigilance about my personal safety because of my post-traumatic stress disorder, it's still, I do not think that I behaved in an unreasonable manner for anyone. Like, just, and the other thing to remember too is that this is in the context of the apex of the Me Too movement. It's in the context of the apex of Time's Up. So, and it's like, and also there are, lawsuits against Yale because, apparently this preceded the Kavanaugh hearings, but there were still ongoing lawsuits at Yale, and especially under Title IX. So basically Yale's campus is being sort of represented as being like this cesspool, and Yale, housing is, no woman is safe there, right? So in this context of this, which I'll go ahead and call it a hysteria, around sexual harassment and sexual assault and that sort of thing, it's that I was given zero benefit of the doubt.
So, Sarah, one of the things I want to bring up with you is, as you're saying, that you didn't get the benefit of the doubt, even if you were wrong and this person was just going to a group of students, he was unescorted in a secure building. You're absolutely entitled to do that. You're absolutely entitled to say, I felt unsafe, regardless of their motive. I mean, that is completely, look, is it overly cautious? Okay, sure. That's not a crime. That's not anywhere near a lynching. It's not within 15 states of a lynching. So that happens, and then there appears to be a secret meeting, and I'm saying secret meeting, but there appears to have been a meeting where things were decided about you, that you weren't allowed to stand in front of your accuser. Then it seems that there's a breakdown, and Will, I'm directing this at you. Okay. A systematic breakdown. And okay, how did we go from this incident where you're like, hey, I feel unsafe, to now she's this racist who's basically lynching people? Where in the administration is the due diligence to go, let's dive into this thing? Because, by the way, for the audience, we haven't even got to the incident yet. Like, this is already bonkers. Where is the culpability with Yale on talking to Sarah and actually getting two sides of the story and going, well, how the F did they ever get to a lynching?
Well, I think coming from, an executive leadership perspective, the culpability is with whoever decided to make this situation into a racial incident without analysis. I don't offhand as an outsider know who that was, but I suspect there was an individual person that made that decision, and that kind of failure of leadership decision. Very often when this happens on college campuses, people from outside of higher education think that a college is basically just students and teachers. It's not. At a typical university like my own, although I think we have a pretty good team there, everyone pretty much just does their job, but you have about 2 or 3 times as many bureaucrats of various types as you do professors. You have people in charge of Greek life and residential life. They run the dorms. Where I'm going with this is you have an entire bureaucracy of what's called DIE, diversity, inclusion, equity. These are people that focus on whether the campus is diverse enough, whether there are racial tensions, training people in things like being aware of implicit bias. It can do some good if it's well managed, but this is probably where you're going to get someone that said, oh, this is a white person confronting a black gentleman at night. We need to recognize this as an example of post-colonial, heterosexist, cis-normative racism. And I think that's where that call was made. There was an individual guy that made that decision. And I think that was a bad, silly decision. Just 2 obvious points here. First of all, the argument that this is a hate crime comparable to a lynching fails totally in that there's no crime here. Even if you think, I personally think the people yelling profanity behaved more rudely than the young lady asking someone to leave the building. But regardless of who you think was at fault in this minor, stupid argument, none of this stuff's illegal. There aren't any crimes here. So, beginning a hate crime investigation, and this to some extent, that gets into my hesitation earlier. This is something that law enforcement, the major national newspapers, so on, probably never should have been involved in at any level. But beginning a campus-wide, quote unquote, hate incident investigation around this seems ridiculous. A second point here is it's hard not to notice that there never would have been any issue here if Sarah had had this confrontation with a white guy or probably with a Hispanic guy. So I think that an individual person, probably in the DIE sector, took a look at these facts and said, no, we're not going to punish the residential life coordinators who are, avenging an act of racism. Instead, we are going to track down a racist. And that, on the basis of this goofy argument that we've been talking about for 30 minutes, is what led to the demands that were next made against Sarah, which, again, I think are one of the most interesting parts of this, where there was going to be sort of a Maoist re-education session where she was going to come in and confess to racism and then educate the white grad students on campus about how they were racist. And Sarah will probably take it from there. But essentially, the leadership failure occurred when someone came in, took the decision-making away from the housing bureaucrats and said, no, this is an incident of racism. And there's an entire bureaucracy in place to do that at most colleges.
That's exactly right. It was insane to me. I couldn't even believe what I was being told. And I think that people need to ask themselves, and I would hope that they would ask themselves, like, why on earth would the Yale administration, Yale grad school dean Lynn Cooley got involved immediately. Yale grad school diversity dean Michelle Nairn got involved immediately. Yale VP of student life Kimberly Goff Cruz got involved immediately. And then they decided that I was going to participate in these Maoist struggle sessions and undergo implicit bias training. And I told them, the first thing I said to them was that, well, oh, you want me to undergo implicit bias training? I could probably teach an implicit bias training. I work on implicit bias and police brutality with Tom Tyler and Tracy Mears at the Justice Collaboratory at the Yale Law School. Tom Tyler and Tracy Mears were two of the main people working with Obama on criminal justice system reform. So you have to ask yourself, like, and this, they knew this. Like the Yale administration, while they were telling me that I had to participate in this public town hall and publicly profess my racism, they knew I was a lifelong human and civil rights activist. They knew this. So why on earth would they have done this to me? And I believe that I have sufficient evidence, and I believe the reason why they did this to me is because they had been targeting me for expulsion for years for being unwoke. So in a nutshell, the other grad students had gone trolling online to dig up dirt on the job candidates. They found some of what they construed as anti-LGBTQ hate speech, which I construed simply as this gentleman making online comments, years old online comments, and in an explicitly Christian forum, basically saying that he adheres to biblical scripture as Christian doctrine, and he understands it to include a prohibition on sodomy, which he understands to include a prohibition on homosexual sex. That's it. And I told the other grad students, I said, look, I'm not going to let you do this. They were going to disrupt his job talk with a protest, with rainbow wigs and rainbow flags. And I'm as pro LGBTQ rights as they come. I have a gay couple, I call them my surrogate dads. They're the ones that paid $10,000 for an attorney to stop Yale from wrongfully expelling me. So I'm as pro LGBTQ rights as they come, but I'm a civil libertarian. I am a hardcore civil libertarian. And I put my foot down with the grad students and I said, I'm not going to allow you to arguably violate his federal civil rights. You are arguably a part of the hiring process. You are arguably discriminated against him on the basis of religion. And I'm not going to stand by and let you do that. So what ended up happening then, there were lots of, tears and accusations and department meetings. And what ended up happening ultimately is that the most of the other grad students in the philosophy and I just joined the department actually ostracized me. They basically socially ousted me from the program. If I walked into a room, they would literally get up and leave. If they wouldn't speak to me and they wouldn't look at me except to glare at me. And it was really devastating to me for a number of reasons. But I really struggled. And this is why I have a mental health history at Yale specifically, is because I was so distraught over having been essentially socially ousted from the philosophy department by the other grad students that the faculty were incredibly supportive of me. And the faculty who wrote character letters on my behalf after the Living or Napping While Black hate crime hoax at Yale cited this incident. A number of them cited this and said that they hoped that they would have the kind of moral courage that I displayed by standing up for the federal civil rights of this evangelical Black man. Now, I was so distraught over this incident that eventually the faculty just said, look, we're basically just insisting that you go and get help at the mental health clinic at the Student Health Center. And so I worked with them in therapy for 2 or 3 years after that. And I also was on some psychotropic medication as well for an extended period of time after that, because I was so just completely devastated by what had happened. I had such high hopes about what my PhD program experience was going to be at Yale. And when I got into the program, I just felt like I had won.
I want to take this opportunity to kind of adjust where we're at here because we're going to run out of time.
I had crossed the finish line, and I was so thrilled to be at Yale and to be in the Ivy League.
Yeah, so let's move the story forward. The story doesn't end here. You have all this stuff early on in the Yale career. Then you have the stairwell incident. And then it seems like there was a dedicated harassment campaign against you following this, where you continued to be. And if there's a crime, this is a form of assault. And again, look, we don't want to be petty, but if there was a crime so far, it's the continued harassment of you because you said, hey, I feel uncomfortable. And now all of a sudden everybody's on the 12th floor doing things all the time.
Right.
Talk briefly about that so we can move into the actual incident. So just like in 30 seconds or less, describe the continued harassment.
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
Talk briefly about that so we can move into the actual incident. So just like in 30 seconds or less, describe the continued harassment.
So there was harassment the entire time until May 8th, 2018, the culminating event. I describe it as being 3 stages approximately. And the first stage was basically the resident coordinators, I believe now were involved, and they were doing everything in their power to book as many crazy parties in that dorm, that common room next to me as they possibly could. So I consider that to be the first stage of harassment. And I really put my foot down around April 6th I eventually ended up dealing mostly with University Provost Stephanie Spangler, who's also the university-wide Title IX coordinator, and Associate Provost Cynthia Smith. And through them, I was dealing with Yale Campus Police Chief Brunel Higgins. So I want people to understand that I was dealing for months with the Yale administration and police and begging them to stop the harassment against me. So there was a second stage of harassment between approximately April 6th to approximately April 24th. And that stage of harassment was mostly focused on my door. So people would come by once or twice a night and they would grab the door handle and shake it really hard, like they were trying to break into my room. They would pound on the door, also slamming of doors, the 12th floor common room door and the elevator door. And then the final stage of harassment was from approximately April 24th, right up until May 8th, 2018, the actual incident. And what that mostly was people inside the interior of the 12th floor common room yelling and screaming through the adjoining wall into my dorm room. And so I also think that it was clear who was harassing me, and that the Yale administration, I actually think, was not only in communication with my tormentors, not only doing nothing to help me stop the harassment by my tormentors, but I actually at this point regard the Yale administration and police to be complicit in the hate crime hoax. And I regard the Yale administration and police to have been assisting my tormentors and harassing me.
I'm going to make you chancellor of Yale real quick. And what are your thoughts? I mean, actually, now there's actual crimes being committed. There's an actual harassment campaign. This is assault. And I don't want to get sued as I don't want, if I'm chancellor, I don't want to get sued for screwing this whole thing up. What are your thoughts?
I mean, at this point, if I were in a university executive role at that university, I would have implemented some fairly minor but real punishments against the people that were harassing Sarah, assuming all of that was confirmed. I think it's interesting. The first part of this case, again, to me, the most fascinating element of this is the transition of what began as, in my personal opinion, an absolutely nothing argument into this nationwide news story of quote unquote racial harassment. That's why this was such a fascinating story for me once I found out that a personal friend or personal acquaintance was involved in it. But I mean, obviously, once things escalated, you'd simply punish the people involved. The difference between the narrative that made it out into the press and what's being described here is pretty striking, I will say. Because, and we're going to work up to the incident at the end that became Napping While Black. But the story here that everybody read about in the Times, 18 times, I believe, was Black people being harassed and abused for no reason. The actual story here is that 2 people got into an argument. The day this occurred in February of 2018, following the argument, the friends of the gentleman that was involved shouted at the woman that was involved. And then when she complained about this Byzantine process began where she ended up becoming accused of racism. And this was the first time that any race narrative really had reared its head here at all at this highly integrated campus. And then apparently this process was followed by an entire period of harassment. I mean, I've lived in college environments. I believe that did occur. So you had doors shaking, you had people shouting into the room during her room during study time, and people slamming the doors on the floor and screaming in the hallways and so on. And all of this, which went essentially totally unreported, is what led up to, and this is smooth segue, what we're going to talk about now, but that's what led up to Napping While Black. What would I have done? I mean, if someone came to me in my office and said, I'm being harassed, I mean, I'm the only person on that floor and there are 5 people who I can probably identify that are acting as though they're going to break into my room. I mean, I would have set those people down and issued some form of demerit or temporary suspension. I mean, it's standard punishment for that kind of behavior. I don't think I would have involved the police, but I definitely don't think I would have punished the person who was the victim. I mean, I think that's the most striking thing about a lot of this.
Well, and just it's as simple as nobody goes on the 12th floor.
Yeah, boom. Yeah,
100% off limits. That is no longer a conference room. That is done. And if you walk up there, then you're going to have a real problem. But instead,
that is the
just lock the common room door. I mean, effective basic leadership. Put a master lock on it. Hopefully, that term's not offensive to anyone, and then we're done. You know, I mean,
that's right. Do you guys want to know the first thing that Beth Bishop, the Yale housing manager, said to me when I met with her on February 26th, Monday of 2018? She said, if that 12th floor common room is becoming a problem, I will shut it. I will close it. I will make it inaccessible for the rest of the academic year. And then I think that after the resident coordinators and these students got in touch with the Yale deans, they were like, oh no, now we're the ones in charge. And they actually were the ones, the resident coordinators themselves were the ones who sent me the email that said, we're not closing the 12th floor common room.
Yeah, what probably happened was that someone contacted, I would speculate, the Dean of Diversity and said, we use this room for important ceremonies for example, the Afro-American Student Organization. We absolutely will not allow a diverse space at Yale to be shut down by the complaints of one bigot. And under certain circumstances, that kind of thing could even have had validity. Here, it seems like the entire race narrative, to me, was brought in as an excuse to explain the original argument. I don't think that, sir, you're here and you don't have, you're here and there's no event going on. Can you leave and come back in an hour? That doesn't strike me as a race statement directed at a young male really in any way, and I'm a black man. So, I mean, it seems that race was brought in as a cover for some of the things, like people then shouted at Sarah and the argument dragged on for a couple of days. And that's when all of a sudden someone went over the heads of the housing manager and said, well, this is an example of bigotry. We're not closing the room because we use that room to celebrate blackness or whatever. And that the race narrative from that point forward was a part of the story.
Let's move into the incident, the Napping While Black incident.
I think you're exactly right.
Okay, let's move into the incident. And again, try to be brief on what exactly happened. Let's not talk about feelings or thoughts. Let's just say, like, black and white, what happened? You walk into the room, what do you see?
I'll be really concise, but I was being harassed from that room that evening, May 7th, 2018. I thought that the harassers had left. I thought no one was in that room. I was in my dorm room frantically trying to clean my dorm room and pack up to leave campus as soon as possible. And this was the very, very tail end of finals. So I go into that room actually just to throw something away because I'd sort of run out of receptacle, garbage receptacle real estate. And I was trying to pack up my room and clean it. So I walk into the room. I see a closed laptop on the desk inside of the dark interior room. This is a completely bizarre thing to see. No one in the 2 years that I've lived there has ever studied in that room. And I also thought to myself, oh my goodness, someone left their laptop here and it's going to get stolen. That's what I was concerned about.
Yeah.
So I entered the dark interior room. I see what appears to be a sleeping human form entirely obscured by a blanket. I have no idea if it's a white man or a black woman. I have no idea. The one thing that I did that I now wish I had not is that when I saw this sleeping form entirely obscured by a blanket, my immediate thought was, oh, this is probably someone who's been using this room to harass me all evening and maybe even likely for months, and that this person is now camped out in this room for the purpose of harassing me. That is what goes through my head. And this was uncharacteristic of me, really uncharacteristic of me to have turned on the light and to have actually confronted the person that was underneath the blanket. But I think I was just so angry at that point, so fed up with the harassment that I did behave in an uncharacteristic fashion. So then the person emerges. It obviously is a Black woman who emerges from the blanket, but I have no idea who this is. I don't know if they're a Yale affiliate. I didn't know it was Lolade Siyonbola. I didn't even know Lolade Siyonbola's name at that point. I don't have any idea who this person is. So then this person immediately pulls an iPhone out from underneath the blanket and holds it up to me. I have no idea. I know it's probably really stupid of me and naive, but at no point did I think I was being recorded. I actually thought to myself that either she was taking pictures of me or I thought that she was actually going to call the Yale campus police herself. And I actually asked her that after she made explicit statements to me that made it clear to me that she was very likely one of the persons who'd been harassing me all evening.
Having the struggle with the other lady, and I shouldn't even say struggle, the conversation, she was videoing it. You asked her if she was, and you basically were just trying to say you can't sleep up here, and it goes haywire. So you call the police helpline, not 911, and they show up, and then basically this whole incident is captured. And again, we've got a misunderstanding. You know, it's not Wall Black. It's just, hey, you shouldn't be up here. But we do seem to have some malice towards you with their attitude. She was ready to do this, already had targeted you, is antagonizing you to do something. And then here it is, this opportunity.
Right.
This is the part that really is shocking to me. And then it escapes
That's
Yale
right.
and goes worldwide with this claim. And the more I've heard about this, the more it just seems preposterous. And look, I can understand point of view. I'm big on all that stuff. You know, from their point of view, I'm sure this went down the way they thought they did. But where was the adult in the room to say, hey, everybody knock it off. None of you have enough business. Well, let's get you some business. Here's a extra final for all of you guys. Why are we even having this conversation? This is crazy. So where did this story break outside of Yale where it really took off and caught fire and you became this horrible, bigoted monster?
Right. So I now believe, just like you said, that I believe this is why I also call it a hate hoax, is I believe that it was a Hail Mary effort on her part, a last ditch effort to provoke a reaction from me and to capture me on video. I also now believe that the Yale administration was involved. I believe that I believe, based on his own tweets, that Sean Kane had been contacted ahead of time by Lolade Siyonbola, Jean-Louis Renison, and was prepared to distribute the video immediately upon Lolade Siyonbola capturing me on video. I also believe that is the case definitely for the griot. I have submitted a FERPA request for Yale's internal emails about the Living or Napping While Black hate crime hoax at Yale, because I do believe the Yale administration and police were complicit. I believe that they may have even instructed Lolade Siyonbola and Jean-Louis Renison what to do and how to go about this. I also believe that the Yale administration may have been in communication with a number of news media outlets. I believe that the ACLU may have been involved before May 8th.
Let me ask. I want to ask Will a question about all this stuff. Let me ask Will a question. And one of the things I want to do for you, Sarah, is get away from the I believes and get right into the actual things that have happened. Because I understand it. Like you've got a lot of assumptions on this, but let's play in the black and white world. Will, What's your assessment of the reliability of the reporting of Sean King?
Okay, so a couple things. First of all, I will say, I think in general, in situations like this, I agree with you, Pete, that from almost that Rashomon perspective, point of view is very important. I believe is a powerful statement, but obviously the idea that the Yale administration coordinated with student activists to set up this incident is pretty purely speculative. The idea that the student activists themselves might have attempted to set something up seems much more realistic. I mean, we have seen that in the past in a couple of different situations. Now, in bringing in the question, would Sean King have become involved with something like that? Is Sean King's reporting not perfectly reliable? Again, for legal reasons, I'll say I don't know in this particular situation, but Sean King has been involved in a number of full-on hate crime hoaxes. I mean, at one point, a African-American female executive told a number of media outlets that she had been, I believe, raped, certainly sexually abused by a police officer. Literally, and he dragged me behind his car and abused me. And Sean King was the national prominent voice that publicized that story, which led to death threats being sent not only to this lawman, but to another officer that happened to have a similar name. It led to millions of shares, tens of millions on Facebook and Twitter of this piece. The entire story turned out to be bluntly bullshit. I mean, police now have body cams, they have dashboard cams. It turned out nothing like this had ever occurred. It had apparently been made up out of whole cloth. Sean King didn't do fairly basic background checking to vet this. Stuff like this, it's not surprising to see Sean King's involvement in this story. And generally, whether the underlying story itself is real or fake, when there is a hotly contested racial story nationally, I mean, Sean King's heavily involved with the Ahmaud Arbery case, for example. So I wouldn't be surprised at all that if, a grainy cell phone video came from a college campus to the man who's sometimes called Talcum X, that he would be the one to take that and without asking too many questions, put that out into the public eye. So I guess my comment would be, not too impressed. I'm not at all surprised to see that name associated with this. There is kind of a new wave of civil rights activists. I mean, Benjamin Crump, some of the people that were in leadership roles with BLM, Occupy, so on, that seems to be moving on to replace, the Als and Jessies of the past. And he's definitely one of those guys.
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, you have to prime the pump. You got to keep water flowing through. So you need these controversies. Student activist groups are looking for something. And if you can fabricate something, why not? Because the cost on being wrong is really usually very low. You can go ruin a bunch of kids' lives as long as the message perpetuates.
If I can say one other thing very, very quickly here. The real issue when it comes to the media's involvement with race relations in America doesn't come in terms of each individual incident. It comes in terms of the narrative that's presented. So, I mean, in terms of the Ahmaud Arbery case, I mean, that actually does seem like a situation where at least manslaughter charges should issue. I mean, you had a confrontation, a group of men surrounded another guy who it appears really was out running and shot him during a fight. You can talk about the criminal history of Arbery, or for that matter, the apparent corruption of the police department in that town, and argue back and forth. But I mean, that is a case where, people involved should get a trial and will very likely go to jail. But there is no epidemic of black men being shot while we're out running. Interracial crime in the United States is about black-white interracial crime in the United States is about 5% of all crime. The last year on record, you can check this just by Googling Bureau of Justice Statistics PDF 2018. There were about 600,000 black on white or white on black violent interracial crimes. There are more than 12 million total crimes. Of those crimes involving blacks and whites, well over 80% of them were black on white. So there's not much interracial crime in the first place. The person most likely to kill you is your ex-wife. And the interracial crime that does exist is every year 70, 80, et cetera, % black on white. Black African Americans are a younger population, slightly but definitely a poorer population. These are just facts. So to present this false narrative by taking every case where the white guy shoots the black guy is deeply dishonest. And that's the broader context in which Sarah's story occurred. So one, you see this all the time, that many of these BS little incidents involving white people winning fights or quote unquote harassing Black people become national stories. I mean, Barbecue Becky comes to mind. Where you had someone, Barbecue Becky was in the right. I mean, I'll probably get some hate mail for saying that, but this is a woman who's walking through a park. She sees a bunch of people full on grilling in what's called the dog run area of the park, where you got pets and kids and stuff. You're not supposed to have an open fire. She asks them to stop. Now, this is a big city. This is Oakland. So she and these guys are probably both rude to each other. I'm from Chicago myself. I know what likely happened. But again, a stupid argument ensues. She calls the cops. Irrelevant nothing burger story. This became major national news for weeks. Becky became a meme. I'm not going to give her a real name, actually, but it's not even Becky. That's just a semi-racist label that was put on this random woman. So the use of these isolated cases to create this narrative is deeply irresponsible. That's my broader point. It's also worth noting that a very large number of the cases themselves collapsed. I mean, I'm in Kentucky, not 50 miles from where the Covington Catholic kids go to school. I mean, that was a situation where the claim is that these prep school athletes literally surrounded a Native American shamanic elder, took his sacred rain drum, chanted "Build the Wall," which is a damn ironic thing to say to an Indian. It turned out that, again, nothing happened. This is two groups of males being mildly rude to each other. And just on and on and on down the line. I mean, the claim that a young woman had her dreadlocks cut off at a DC prep school, the claim that Black people can't be served in Chipotle. Every couple of weeks, one of these stories makes national media waves. Many of them turn out to be nonsense. And even if they were all true, there is no epidemic of interracial violence. So that's my little spiel there.
Yeah. And I guess, and in the sake of time, this story does not seem to stand up to any kind of level of scrutiny. We have not done a comprehensive study of this by any means. You'd have to look at both sides. That's not my job, though. My job, is to chronicle part of the story. And the other side has clearly been chronicled a lot, and it doesn't jive. It doesn't add up. Again, where are the administrators? Where are these? Like I've been the accused in a secret meeting in the military, where things were decided without me ever being able to know what's going on. It never goes well when you do that. If administrators took the role of being above reproach, let's get this right. Let's build off ramps. Let's keep everybody wants to graduate. Everybody wants to get through finals and go home. Let's just make that our goal. How do we get this to happen? And then just go home. Everybody come back next year. We're good. Yale is not a place full of racism. It's just not. And instead, what we get are these crazy national stories that continue the damage that Sarah has, in her life. And it's a shame that happens. And hopefully you'll be able to get your PhD all sorted out. And hopefully you go on and you find your stuff. And I heard you talking in the other episode. Will's totally right. You can find a home for what you do. It's important work, and you're going to be all right. It's just terrible that you had to endure this, sack of lies and just look. If they did this to the right person, they bullied you is what really happened. And again, this is double bad on Yale. Like they're supposed to be against bullying.
The Yale administration.
Yeah. Let me finish. They bullied you. If they did that to me, I would probably knock someone out along the way, and there would be a crime because I would knock someone's teeth out. Be like, because look, I'll take it seriously. Like I now assume that you're trying to harm me. And so my trigger for action is don't be anywhere near me. If you're within arm's reach, I'm assuming you're trying to hurt me. It's all of you guys against me. And that's just me. I'm not going to actually harm anybody, but that guy exists all over the place. These things it's a dangerous practice to do these kinds of things. I'm positive you've got legal things going against Yale. I'm positive you're going to continue to do all those things. Let's not even get into that because it doesn't do your case any good.
Yeah.
And they're not able to respond to it because look, they already screwed this up. This did not go how they're supposed to. It's not supposed to be national news when someone gets in an argument in a stairwell at a school. That cat's supposed to stay in the bag and
that's
be
right.
like, that's just
there's a lot of blame to go around. There's a lot of blame to go around, but I 100% blame the Yale administration for this. 100%.
And you're supposed to.
They immediately made public statements that were grossly defamatory, that were malicious. against me. And then they continue to do so. They still defame me. They still publicly defame me. And I just want to make sure people know that in July 2018, Yale General Counsel admitted to my then attorney that they knew that there was absolutely no reason to think that I had ever acted out of racial animus or bias in any way, shape, or form. And they dropped the racial component of the harassment charges against me. And then about a week thereafter, at the beginning of August 2018, Yale President Peter Salovey made a grossly defamatory public statement condemning me as guilty of racial harassment. He precluded the possibility of me receiving any due process whatsoever. This was before my hearing. He also knew, I know for a fact.
I understand those things, and we covered that
Yale.
stuff in Pete's podcast. I mean, I obviously there's some damage there. I want you to be able to.
I'm sorry.
No, you're okay. You're okay. We covered those things. And I just want to do you the favor of saying, like, look, you're going to be able to go after them. And if they've done these things, you'll have counsel and they'll take care of it and you'll get a nice paycheck at the end of it. It sucks, but that's the best thing. And then, not that you need my advice, but a lot of these things, do your best to get past them because it's not going to do you any good to hold on to it. It's already a 2-year-old thing. It's horrible. Hopefully it's as close to over as possible. Get a lawyer, let your lawyer do the work, and then, just go get a great job that you love. And hopefully Yale has to cut you a fat check because you certainly deserve it after the nonsense. They've definitely caused you damage, that's for sure. Will, any parting thoughts?
That's right.
Oh, I essentially agree. I guess I do have one parting thought, actually, which is remember that the world in which the narrative exists is a tiny part of the real world. I mean, this ridiculous sequence of events happened at Yale University. It was publicized by the New York Times. And as someone from an alpha world city myself, it might seem like this is the end of my life. This is the end of the world. But it's not. I guarantee if you go to any mainstream center-right trading floor in the world, or you go pursue a job in those original professions of law, and I believe engineering, or you look for elite level civilian work with the military or something like that, the reaction of most people to your saying, I got in an argument in the stairway and was accused of lynching, would be what me and Pete's reaction was, which is, what the hell? That's crazy. So, I mean, just keep that in mind. A friend of mine who actually traveled to this country from Cambodia after the Vietnam War once said that real sophistication is being able to adapt in any environment. It's being able to survive in Yale or in jail, jungle, or in, quote unquote, the corporate jungle. And I could go on with this, but I think that's a very valid point. Just remember that what happened there in that weird little sector of the world isn't going to define the rest of your life unless you let it. But that's one of the reasons I think Pete wanted you to tell kind of your side of the story. My last line here is that I assume perhaps him, would be more than willing to talk to Miss Siyonbola, if that's how that's. Of course. Yeah, but I don't necessarily think that's going to occur.
Agreed.
Yeah, but I'm very glad to have heard your side of the story, and I think many other people in the USA will want to as well.
Sarah, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for telling your story. And again, yeah, like Will said, the offer is open. I would talk to, like, they will do it, but I'd talk to the Yale administrators, Miss Siyonbola, anybody, because, we can only get better with these things by hashing them out a little bit. And, a lot of times, like the Trayvon Martin thing, right? If cooler heads had prevailed and either one of those guys had just walked away and said, this didn't worth my time, they'd both have better lives today. But they didn't. And so the ability to have these conversations hopefully de-escalates the next thing that comes down the line. That's my hope, is to try to get us all to relax a little bit, get in the middle and survive, because places that are truly dangerous, like Cambodia can be, and Iraq and Afghanistan, all those places, things are not settled in ways that we would understand as being normal. Instability is their norm. We're so lucky that this is not the norm for us. And again, it's regrettable that you had to go through this, Sarah, but hang in there. It's America. You keep on working. Someone's going to champion your cause. You're going to write a book, and it is going to work out. Thank you both for coming on a Saturday. I really appreciate it. Let's continue to do this conversation.
Thank you.
Yes.